Hello, welcome to another Tag Team Opinions series of videos, YouTube videos I'm doing with my good buddy PM Night 12. I'm going to kick this one off. The topic is going to be, was Superman boring? I thought it was maybe an interesting topic to kind of take on. It's something that I can remember going on since I was a little kid, just first reading superhero comics. Even till now, you still see it on websites and forums and things like that, and it's a subject of the debate. And I thought it's pretty relevant because, you know, we're getting the whole Superman revamp now. So I thought it would be an interesting subject to tackle. So I'm going to start it off, and then, then Phil's going to do his response, and we'll go from there. Please, everybody, watch both of our videos. Please feel free to make whatever type of responses or comments you like to make. Okay, so just to start off, basically, usually what you would hear is, when I were a kid, when I still hear it now, is that Superman is boring for a couple of reasons. Either it's just that he's too powerful and he's got too many abilities and he can't get hurt, and because of that, you can't do an interesting story. He's never really at risk, and it's just boring because he's just too powerful. Or you hear that, well, he's boring because he's too much of a Boy Scout. He's too much of a goody-goody. He's perfect, and I can't relate to that. And he never makes mistakes, and he's flawless, and that's just boring. So let's kind of jump on to the first one, the whole thing of Superman being too powerful. I used to hear that a lot when I was younger, and back then you had kids who were like in both companies, but you also had people who were like DC kids, and you had people who were like Marvel kids, and I used to really hear it a lot from kids who were more like the Marvel fans. But the thing is, in hindsight, those same kids never said anything like, oh, the Hulk is the strongest guy on Marvel Earth. He's boring. Or the Silver Surfer, he has the power cosmic. He's so boring. Or Dr. Doom can fight the Fantastic Four or the Avengers to a standstill. He's a boring villain. Just the opposite. We were always really excited when those characters came up. I think the whole thing about Superman being too powerful and thus boring really comes from the ideas of the type of stories they used to put Superman in, especially back in the old days. And I'm thinking when you go back to like the 30s and 40s, Superman was a really hands-on guy. He was a crime fighter. He was a justice bringer, He's fighting thugs and mob guys and mad scientists and evil dictators. And, he's taking them and giving them the old what for. But as we move toward the 50s and things, Superman became more of a kind of an authority figure, he's all about the rules and things like that. And then you kind of had things going on in pop culture and with comics where like, oh, we can't have too much violence in the comics and things like that. So Superman all of a sudden, instead of, fighting crime, Superman is getting these kind of like whimsical adventures, whimsical little tales to amuse children, and nothing that's going to be too frightening for them, So, Superman would become hypnotized, or he's a victim of magic or whatever, and some wizard would make him stand on his head and like juggle or something, or he'd have to suffer the effects of some weird offshoot of kryptonite where, he has to go under weird body transformations, or maybe gets a lion's head, or he becomes fat, or whatever. Just, crazy things like that. And you compare that to what was going on in Marvel in the 60s, the Marvel heroes are routinely fighting thugs and communists and villains and monsters, and then when they ran out of villains to fight, they would fight each other, and there's just a difference in, here's the delightful little story, and then here's the action-packed story, you know what I mean? And even by the 70s, where the kind of camp factor had kind of died down at DC Comics, Superman was around, but still, the stories weren't any more what do I want to say here? The stories weren't any more hipper or daring or anything like that for the most part, If anything, they kind of lost, the charm that those old stories. You read those old stories, those old campy stories. They're still kind of fun and charming and delightful in their own way. But you're getting into like the mid '70s. The stories are just kind of Okay, and the next thing you hear is, Superman's born because he was a Boy Scout, and I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily bad to have a hero that's supposed to be representing all that's good about America, especially in modern times where you have like politicians and whatnot who get run out of office over like, whatever sexual impropriety or whatever. It's just kind of weird that, we won't accept those, real life people for their flaws, but a guy that's supposed to be trying to do the right thing, we don't want to accept him either because he's too boring or whatever. I would say in a landscape of like pulp culture and movies and comic books and things like that, where things are increasingly edgy and grim and gritty, a character like Superman kind of stands out now, just because, he kind of stands for decency and values and things like that, as opposed to just being badass, I'll say this, when everybody is a hard ass, it's kind of the more moral person who sticks to his principles that actually kind of stands out. I will say this, one of the most revered Superman stories in recent years, was an issue of Action Comics. I can't remember the exact number right now because I don't have it in front of me, but the story was called What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and American Way, and the whole point of the story was dealing with this whole issue just head on, does this type of hero still have a place in modern society, and I think smart and creative writers can come up with stories where Superman's challenge on an ethical level as well as being challenged on a physical level, and just because he's a Boy Scout, that doesn't make him perfect. That doesn't mean he can never make mistakes. That doesn't mean he never gets angry or anything like that. But I think that would be a really interesting dilemma to put the character into, One of the things I was kind of interested in when it started was the whole grounded storyline, where the whole idea was Superman was going to walk across America and just help people with their problems. That's a good idea for a guy that's supposed to be standing up for, the common man and the American dream and things like that. Now, personally, I have to admit, full disclosure, I gave up on it halfway just cause I thought it was a great idea, but the execution kind of lacked a little bit. But the point is, I thought that was a great idea. You know what I mean? Another thing you hear is okay, he's too godlike and I can't relate to him. And that's kind of really weird to me because, some of the most popular characters that people claim they can relate to are guys like Batman and Wolverine. And I'm not putting those characters down. I love those characters as well. But the thing is, Wolverine is a guy who's been an ex-samurai, ex-secret agent, goes AWOL on a whim from the Canadian military service to join a group of superheroes. He's got a ton of Asian girlfriends overseas, Ninjas come attack him when he goes to his bar over there. Then he comes back to New York, tons of ninjas attack him again. Then he's got his long lost son who has the same powers and come on, that's not you or anybody Same thing with Batman. Batman's great, but, he's a billionaire. He's got all kinds of advanced technology and super weapons in his basement. He's got, scores of teenage sidekicks that he's got working for him. He's got his son that he fathered with the female assassin daughter of some eco-terrorist. Come on. That doesn't happen to normal people every day. Once again, I'm not hating on those characters. I love those characters a lot, but those characters are not anybody or live any life you've ever heard of, But compare that to Clark Kent's background, which is a very important part of his mythos, He was raised in a small town. His parents were farmers. He went to public school. He had a high school sweetheart. He left home and got a job. He does the right thing, not because he's driven by revenge or anything like that, but just because he was raised right, because he thinks it's the right thing to do to try to help people when he can, you know. This is somebody you know, if it isn't you yourself, you know what I mean? I mean, that's how people react in the real world, you know. He looks out for his neighbors. He tries to make friends with people when he can. He, you know, might have a disagreement with a coworker or whatever. They might come to blows, but they work it out, you know what I mean? That's relatable, you know what I mean? Yeah, that's relatable. It's either you or somebody you know. But once again, I think it's a case of the type of stories they put Superman in versus, how do we get an interesting story out of his background? How do we make that relevant and so on and so forth? I remember, like I said, I was reading comics off and on for the last 25 years or so. And I remember when they made the change from that kind of 70s, Superman to like the more modern Superman when John Byrne left Marvel Comics and went to DC and started doing Superman, and he kind of tweaked the character a little bit, revamped the character a little bit, okay, but he really, looking back, didn't make any major changes, not really. It was just kind of tweaked a bit. It was still the Superman we know, but he put Superman in interesting stories. He brought in new characters, new situations, used Superman in different ways, Superman was now, a guy who had interesting motivations and emotions and had a personality, as opposed before where he was just kind of this sort of officer-friendly type character, who comes on and tells you to brush after every meal and things like that. Now all of a sudden, Superman's getting knocked out of the sky every once in a while, you know what I mean? And I think that's what the real situation is, It's not that Superman is boring, it's just that over the years they keep putting him in boring stories, they have something interesting going, or they might have a gimmick, or they might have a stunt, or they might have a really great story, but then they go back to kind of status quo sort of things that get kind of run of the mill or whatever. And that's what I think. I think Superman is actually a very fascinating character through the background, through his kind of Midwest upbringings, and his background, his personality there can be used, his values can be used to spin off interesting stories. Of course, the more superhero-y science fiction stuff at Krypton and outer space and blah, 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 of course, So that's basically my take. My take is basically this. Superman is not, and that's what you need. Superman is not boring, but he's been in boring stories, and to make Superman exciting again, you don't need to have him, you don't need to give him a new costume, even though new costume, I guess, is welcome at this point. But, you know what I mean? You just need to come up with interesting stories, interesting takes, interesting situations, interesting, emotional things, interesting, ethical conflicts and things like that. Okay, so basically that's my take. Watch Phil's video. Let us both know what you take, and we welcome all responses. Thanks, and you have a great one.